So, Lone Rider here, and I want to do a sort of first impressions, mini review as it were, of the Devil's Edge Qama, or Qama, I guess it's called Qama, from Cult of Athena. Now, this is an interesting sword. It's actually something that's very similar, as you can tell by the shape, to a Roman Gladius. The blade is a little over 17 inches long, so it's comparable with some of the shorter Gladii. The Roman Gladius tended to have a blade between 18, 19, 20, 22 inches, depending on the type. And you'll notice the not only the size but the overall shape of the blade is very similar. And this, the main difference with this is the handle. The handle is made from slabs, as you can see, riveted through, whereas the Gladius typically has a turned bone or bone/wood handle. Oftentimes the top and bottom parts, the guard and the pommel are made of wood, and the grip itself is made of bone. On reproduction, sometimes they're all wood. It depends. But if you want a Gladius and basically can't afford one, this is a great budget option. It's like $40-some from the website Cult of Athena. Devil's Edge tends to be like their house brand, and this in particular was a bargain because it was a blemished model. It was what they sell as munitions grade, i.e. something that's not suitable for a collector, but is basically, it's functional, but it's got some flaws. Now, I couldn't tell there was anything wrong with this when I first got it. On close inspection, there appears to be a slight unevenness in the blade. The blade is not, it looks as if it goes off that way, very, very slightly. It's hard to tell. You probably won't pick this up on camera if I point it at the camera, but that, I guess, was the extent of the flaw. Well, I was so happy with this, I ordered a regular, non-blemished one. Excuse me, just to have a better version. But this does actually cut, and it comes sharp. Windlass Steelcrafts, for example, offers a Qama. They offer several. They offer a one with a horn handle made in scales, very similar to this. They offer one with a rubber handle, a plastic handle. That's on their Cobra Steel line, which is an even more budget version. Scalagrim did a review of that many years ago, and that's another option. But it's notable that, except for their Cobra Steel line, Windlass Steelcrafts, generally speaking, doesn't sell their swords sharp. They have to be sharpened either by the seller or by the person who's buying them. This came sharp. Now, that said, it wasn't like sharp. If you ran your hand over the edge, you wouldn't get cut. It was sharp enough to cut water bottles out of the box, but I just touched it up a little with a sharpening stone, just very little. And then at that point, it was sharp enough to cut paper and certainly to cut water bottles. With a short blade like this, you sometimes have a hard time finding the center of percussion. At least I do. Of course, I'm not very good at cutting, but what I found is that you want to cut with this area. So basically, where the parallel edges transition to the point. So this sort of area is where you want to try and cut with. Now, I'm very happy with this. Like I said, this is the blemished version, but even still, the blade is short and comparatively stiff. You can feel flex in it, but you can't pick it up on camera. It's just not. And also, this is sharp, so I'm not going to, cut myself trying to flex it. But you can feel that there's a temper to it. It vibrates if you hit the pommel, but not visibly. I mean, you can feel it and hear it, but it's not going to go going like a longer sword would. A longer sword, if you hit the pommel, you'll get visible vibration, usually except in the area where the center of percussion is, and that's kind of how you can find the center of percussion on a sword. If you're not sure, you hit the bottom, and the blade will vibrate, but the part that's not vibrating is where you want to hit with, generally speaking. With this, it's so short that you don't get that, but you can feel that there's a vibration that runs up it. So I mean, it's solidly made. The grips are on there solidly. The blade is apparently well tempered. Like I said, this was the blemished version, and like I said, if you kind of look, you can sort of see an imperfection in the straightness of the blade, but it's really hard to tell. And it does cut well. I cut water bottles and so on and so forth with it since receiving it. Now, I was going to re-hilt this with a Gladius style hilt, but in order to do that, I would have had to grind down, because you can see the tang conforms to the shape of the handle. I would have had to grind the corners off here in order to slip a handle on. I decided not to do that, but what I did do is I ground the rivets off, and I'm still in the process of cleaning this up. Obviously, you can see they didn't come off cleanly. When you get this new, it comes with rivets that have large protrusions on this side, and that's traditional of the kanji or the Qama, but it's not Qama, but it's not something you want if you're going to try and use this like a Gladius. Now, I found if you held it with the rivets on the finger side, you could sort of work around them. If you held it with the rivets sticking out on this side, they kind of locked your hand in a hammer grip. It wasn't very comfortable unless you held it just like this. But on this side, you could certainly get away with holding it like this. And in fact, you could rest your thumb on the top rivet if you wanted to use it sort of for leverage in that way. Now, what I did is I cut them off, not quite flush with the handle, but like a millimeter above. And I'm still in the process of sanding them down and smoothing it, so they're kind of rough. But what I found in the process of doing that, and this is a warning for anybody who wants to try this, is that these rivets are apparently aluminum. It makes sense. They were fairly thick and bulky, and but when I was cutting them, you could see what happened is when I got to the end of the cut, it kind of broke off there at the end. Now, the handles are still solid. The grips aren't coming off, but it doesn't look very nice, right? It would have looked nicer if this was a completely round shape that was just cut flatter, as because he started out as these sort of protruding cones. A round shape would have been nice, but what I ended up with was this, because I was cutting downward, and then here at the very bottom it cracked. And that's what tipped me off that they were aluminum. I tested it afterwards with a magnet, and it was confirmed. So I would advise, if you want to cut off the protruding cone so that you can use this more like a Gladius, what you should do is cut very slowly, measured strokes, and maybe even consider using something like a jeweler's saw instead of a hacksaw, because a hacksaw is not necessarily the finest and most detailed of instruments, whereas a jeweler's saw will cut very slowly, but will hopefully avoid causing the ends to shear off the way that did in an uneven manner. Nevertheless, this was $20-some for the blemished version, so I'm not complaining. I got a functional short sword for less than what most people would pay for a pocket knife. So, and I have pocket knives that cost 3-4 times what this costs. So, I'm not complaining. It holds a decent edge. It's 1095 carbon steel. It comes with a decent finish on it. And like I said, functionally, if you're looking for, it works as what it is, which is a Qama or a Kinjai. But if rather than the national dagger of Georgia, what you're looking for is something to stand in for a Gladius. And for some reason, Gladius reproductions tend to be fairly, you can get some inexpensive ones, but they tend to cost more than Qamas and Kinji. So if you're looking at this and then you're looking at what a Gladius would cost, a similar quality Gladius, this is always going to be cheaper for some reason. I think it's the grip construction, to be quite honest. But be that as it may, whether you want to buy one and try and rehilt it as a Gladius, or just cut the nubs off and use it that way, or just leave it as is with the nubs and work around them, this is definitely a good thing to use as a stand-in for a Gladius. Like I said, you lose maybe an inch of blade length, But it's pretty damn cool. It's a functional sword for, again, less than most people spend on a jackknife, and I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. I wish that I had better luck with cutting these off, because that really does look like shit. But I'm probably going to rehilt it at some point anyway, or at least replace the rivets. So there you go. But anyway, that's the Devil's Edge Qama or Kinjai. And like I said, if you want a Gladius and can't quite afford one, you're looking at a Gladius and you're like, it's $180. This is $40-something. Okay? And like I said, I didn't even pay that because I got the blemished version. So it definitely something to think about. And it's pretty fun to muck around with. It looks pretty darn cool hanging on the wall, and if you want to go full hog and completely rehilt it, I mean that's an option. I actually have read of people doing that. So you could have a budget Gladius, or just a stand-in for a Gladius, or a Qama or a Kinjai if that's what floats your boat. So there you go. Another thing, it comes with a sheath, not a scabbard. It's leather, not wood covered with leather. It's just leather. But it's fairly thick and robust. It comes with a belt loop on the top. The belt loop sticks up higher, though. I've been wearing this shoved in my belt, so I just tied the belt loop down. It also comes with 2 loops on the back that have a strap on them. And the idea, I guess, is that you can wear it over your shoulder like a baldric, the way the Romans actually wore the Gladius. The problem is the strap isn't long enough. If you try and wear it over your shoulder, it ends up sitting like here, which is just kind of strange. So I just took that off. But it does come with a scabbard. Being a leather scabbard, I wouldn't store it in there long term. Leather scabbards, with presumably some exceptions, but generally speaking, what I've heard and what I've seen is that leather scabbards, if you leave it in there, it tends to rust. So I don't know. I mean, if you wax the blade, they make a product called Renaissance Wax, which is used for coating blades for long-term storage, or you just store it outside the scabbard. Have it on a shelf, have this here and on the scabbard here. But I wouldn't store it in the scabbard and just leave it there for a long time, because, like I said, leather scabbards don't tend to be the greatest for non-stainless blades. But that said, at least it does come with the scabbard. If you want to transport it, carry it, wear it at a reenactment, whatever, you need some kind of a scabbard, right? I mean, you can't just throw a sharp sword into a rucksack. It's dangerous. So, it does come with a scabbard, which is nice. Now, after you put it in and out a couple times, it does get, you'll see there, does get a little loose, but it's a fairly tight fit at first, and it's a decent, like I said, it's a thick scabbard. It's several layers of leather. It's not rigid like a sheath, but I should say it's a sheath, not a scabbard. I always mix that up. A sheath is typically flexible. A scabbard is typically rigid. So it's not rigid like a scabbard. It is a sheath, but at least it is a sheath. So you have something to put it in where it's not going to be, a sharp blade just sitting there on a shelf. Because this does, in fact, like I said, come sharp. It doesn't come sharp as I would want it. Like I said, I touched up the edge a little bit, but it does come sharp per se. It's not blunt. It's not safe when you buy it. It comes sharpened. So, and in that vein, there is a secondary bevel, but it's not bad, right? It's not bad. Now, historically, a Roman Gladius, for example, generally had not much of a secondary bevel. It pretty much tapered right to the edge. So this is, again, a little bit of a departure, but it's $40-something for a functional sword. I'm not complaining, all right? So there you go. Now, in cut tests, like I said, you got to cut kind of with this part. Thrusts are interesting. Thrusting water bottles, single serving size water bottles, Well, you look at the width of this blade, it's almost 2 inches wide, or about 2 inches wide. I found that thrusting a water bottle basically cuts it in half. So if you can picture a push or a pull cut with the point, the point goes in and then you have this wider section, and so it cuts as it goes in. And I mean, this is a devastating thruster. This is a pretty good cutter. People say the Gladius was only used to thrust. I think that was because the Romans were operating in tight formation. They didn't want to start, swinging them around and accidentally clock the guy in the head that was standing next to you. They certainly are very effective thrusters. This is a wicked point. Be very careful when you handle one of these because of the point is so acute. But it does cut. It's got a decent heft for a short sword, and frankly, if you're looking at one of these and on the website and you're on the fence and you're like, I don't know if I want to buy that, it's very substantial. You've got a nice thick tang here. The blade stock is fairly thick. Yes, it's kind of short, but it's solid, right? It's solid, and even like I said, even this blemished version cuts well, and thrusts. Oh, it thrusts like a lightsaber through a Sheath, or a hot knife through butter. It really is very effective. You can imagine, the accounts of people who had to face the Gladius Hispaniensis, the Spanish sword, in the hands of the Roman legionary. Some of the accounts talked about how they thrust, but some of the accounts also talked about, arms and heads coming off, and not to be gruesome, but I mean, it's history. That's what these were for. To you and me, this is just something to muck around with, or something to learn about, or something to practice with. A skill, chopping water bottles or watermelons or whatever. But historically, these were weapons of war, and apparently they were very effective for all of that. And even on an inexpensive reproduction like this, you get a sense of how devastating this blade must have been. If you were a Gaul or somebody and you were facing off against the Romans, it must have been daunting, especially in conjunction with the large shield, with the scutum that they used. So this is definitely something to check out if you're interested in Roman history. You saw Gladiator or Spartacus one too many times. Not Cory Booker, Spartacus, the movie from 1960, based on Howard Fast's novel. Yes, I know Howard Fast was a socialist, but beggars can't be choosers, okay? It was an awesome movie with a lot of sword fighting, and Douglas was in it. Great. It's funny. People talk about politics and Hollywood, but growing up, I never thought highly, obviously, of communists or socialists, but I also never thought poorly of Spartacus, and I knew from a very early age that the book was at least based on a socialist novel, because I had a copy of the book that I got at a yard sale, and I remember staying up late into the night reading about the adventures of Spartacus and his rebellion against Rome. And when I eventually found out that they made a movie back in 1960, I was so psyched that I remember I must have taken that out from the public library like 3 or 4 times, and it was on VHS back in the day. And big movie, but very long. And sometimes, like the old Lawrence of Arabia movie on VHS, it came on 2 tapes, and you had to change over halfway through. I think Spartacus was like that. I don't know if it was quite that long, but I know it was pretty long. And I must have seen that, 2 or 3, 4 times growing up. And it is interesting because later on somebody pointed out to me that Howard Fast was a socialist, and I remember reading the book as a kid. I still have it downstairs. It's a very old copy. I don't know. For all I know, it's the first printing, and it might be worth something. I don't know. But I remembered that, and then I remembered that I noticed that when I was reading the book, that it was, you know what though, sometimes a good story is just a good story. And I think that's not to throw in a total non sequitur aside here, because this is just a review of the sword, but like I said, if you've seen, Gladiator too many times, or you watched Spartacus growing up, and you think it'd be cool to get yourself one of these swords, check this one out because it's a bargain. But talking about Spartacus, because it occurred to me the other day when I rewatched it, after having rewatched Gladiator for like the third time. And also there's a movie called The Eagle, which is actually pretty interesting. It's about the legion that disappeared in England, north of Hadrian's Wall. Anyway, fictionalized account, obviously, but good story nevertheless. But if talking about Spartacus, a lot of people nowadays talk about politics in movies, whether it's, the so-called SJW, whatever, in The Last Jedi, or whether it's, politics and other things. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of people are very in your face with politics nowadays. I think maybe they could take a cue from the olden days. Even people like Howard Fast, who were avowed socialists, could still tell a good story, and it didn't ruin it. Growing up, even at an early age, I was opposed to things like socialism and communism. And it shocked me when I realized that one of the stories that I grew up loving was written by a socialist and a communist. But I guess it's to his credit that even though we have very different worldviews, he could still tell a good story and an entertaining story. And I remember, like I said, I have very fond memories of sitting late into the night, sitting in bed with a flashlight reading. This is what we did before, the internet, folks. Sitting up, late at night as a youngster with a flashlight in bed, when my folks thought I was asleep, reading books, and whether it was, Louis L'Amour's Westerns, or whether it was, stories of the American Revolution, or whether it was Spartacus. I have very fond memories of that, and in particular of Spartacus. I read that several times, and I remember the first time I read that book, after getting it, we found it at a yard sale for like 15 cents, me and my folks. And I was like, are you sure you want to buy this? They kind of knew that it was written by a socialist. And I said, what's it about? And when they told me, it's about this gladiator who fights for freedom from the Romans, I said, hell yeah, I want to buy it. And I remember the first time I read that book, I was on the edge of my seat. And it just goes to show that back in the day, even people who you would vehemently disagree with could tell a good, entertaining story. And I miss those days. I miss that, that day when, even people who you might think they represent something awful, can still have a form of integrity. And you can still agree on something, even if it's only a good story. Because there's no such thing as only a good story. Good stories, they have a power to them. They have an impact to them. Here I am 30 years later, and I still remember the first time I read that book. But yeah, if you saw the movie, or you read the book, or you saw any other movie like The Eagle or Gladiator that involved, dudes with Roman swords, and you were like, hey, I want one of those Roman swords, this is definitely an option to consider. This is a very budget-friendly option, like I said. They're $40-some. If you get like the factory blemished version, and it turns out to not be too bad, like this particular one. Like I said, I ordered this, and I was so happy with it, even though it's the blemished version for $20-some. I went and I ordered a second one, that's the regular quality one, because I was that happy with it. So, yeah, consider getting your hands on one. They're awesome. They're wonderful. Be very careful with the points, but if you want a budget Gladius or a Gladius stand-in, this is definitely something cool. And check out about the Qama or the Kinjai itself as well, because it is, in all historical fairness, its own weapon with its own sort of culture and heritage as well. But to me, I wanted a Gladius. I couldn't afford, the extra $100, and I was like, well, this is kind of like a Gladius. So there you go, Lone Rider out, and I just wanted to dash off a quick review of this because I was just so psyched. This is definitely something, I mean, you can't go wrong with one of these. It's just It's solidly made. It's sharp out of the box. Needs a little touching up, but it is sharp. And it's just there's a certain simplicity to this design. You look at one of these, and like I said, you picture, the Roman legion, Spartacus, all of that history stuff. So I would just say, if you're interested, check it out. This is, like I said, this is the Devil's Edge version. Windlass and a bunch of others also make their own versions, but definitely something to consider. Lone Rider out. Rock on. Stay safe. Be cool.